And discipline, was it your mother who was a disciplinarian or your father or neither one?
My father was the one who would punish me, not by spanking me, but by hitting me on the head with his knuckle. That's probably why I'm such a nuthead. But my mother, I don't remember that she ever flagellated me. She would say, "Go get a switch," to me, but she would never use it after I'd go get it. But then at about the 6th grade or 7th grade, she suffered tremendous schizophrenia and was no longer with us, so that I was in the latter part of grade school and all of high school a one-parent family. My father did a good job taking care of us.
And your mother certainly got you started.
Yeah.
Yes. Do you remember being a reader? Are you a reader now?
My mother, again, had me in these summer books where you get a gold seal for
yes.
so many books. I'm not a reader now, except in my own field. I subscribe to about 10 journals at home. We don't take a newspaper. This makes me enjoy getting on the shuttle or the airplane and seeing yesterday's paper. It's a real treasure, but it's a block from where my garbage can is to where the garbage is picked up. And 7 days of Washington Post is a backbreaker. And I never read it when I was taking it, except on those rare days when I had time to kill at home. And I don't kill much time in the morning.
So you don't take a newspaper?
I don't take a newspaper.
And you read only in your field?
I almost invariably read in the field of biology, folk medicine.
You're a man of several fields.
I don't read music journals. That's for
no.
Sure.
Do you remember reading anything as a child that was particularly...
One of the formative books that I read was called The Harvester.
Oh, yes.
This was
Gene Stratton Porter.
I'd forgotten that, but I think this is when I was 14 or 15 and courting the first wife, and we had decided that we were going to the mountains of North Carolina and make a living harvesting ginseng and that sort of thing. And that did have an influence on me.
I'm sure it influenced a lot of us. Do you remember games that you played?
The family played Parcheesi, and later Monopoly.
Mm-hmm.
But more fun to me was the hide and seek outdoors. Both
Anything outdoors?
Yeah.
Did you?
And for a while, I was a groupie going to the forest, but even today, and I think from age 12 on, I would take long hikes all by myself if I couldn't find anybody who wanted to join me.
What was the terrain like around Durham?
The place I remember in Durham, the thing I remember most vividly about it was that right next door there was a lot that was filled with honeysuckle. I didn't know at the time that it was even honeysuckle, but we had carved tunnels out under that. And that's a grotesque environment, but it was heaven to me then, crawling through those tunnels under the honeysuckle. The Raleigh environment, I lived out near Crabtree Creek, such that a three-mile hike had me on what I considered was a pristine forest along Crabtree Creek. A lot of it I learned later was sewage irrigated, but I didn't catch typhoid. I used to skinny dip and fish, catching catfish in the river. And I walked that by the time I was through high school from its source on both sides in different segments. And beautifully, by the time I was 15, I ended up with a job at the Crabtree Creek. It was then called Crabtree Creek State Park. It was one of those programs where high school people could link up with someone who needed summer work. And a Mr. Jim Kessler got me a job at that same park that I'd been honing for 4 years. I used to slip out there and camp in their cottages unbeknownst to them. We would walk with back on back 12 to 14 miles to this particular camp. And then later I ended up being sort of a maintenance man. He called me a junior park ranger, but really I was swinging the brush blade and cutting the grass. But
and how old were you?
15.
15. Do you remember how much you got paid?
No. But there's one song in here that was written when I was 15, and it was about a little girl that I never even spoke to, who also sat on the porch swinging her father was one of my bosses, and she had nice blonde hair. And there's a song in here about chamomile. The first verse of that was written when I was 15. The latter verse was written about 3 years ago. The verse about now we're getting old and fatter, but it really doesn't matter. But the first verse was written there at the Crabtree Creek Park when I was 15. And I was very lonely then. Mr. Kessel lived up here, and out in the middle of an old broom straw field was a one-room shanty, no John, no electricity. And except for me and a guitar and a cot, very formative years, because here you are 15 years old and you're away from home 3 months. So I've never really been back home for more than 2 or 3 days at a time since then.
Since you were 15?
No, since I went, through high school. But once I left high school and went to college, it was a 2 or 3 day thing. I say this because my son has just left at age 25, and I miss him terribly.
Yes, I assure you do. I want to talk more about your family, but I still don't want to leave Raleigh. I was thinking about you playing the guitar. Was that your first instrument? I know you play more than one.
The guitar was the first instrument, and I think I was still in grade school. I remember a gentleman, he was fat to me then, he's built like me today. He taught me how to play the guitar, and my dad always would buy me something if I said I'll master it. He taught me the first 3. We used to call them hillbilly chords. We'll call them country chords today. And then I picked up most of it on my own. But the guitar to this day is a very close friend. I also play the bass fiddle. My first wife said, "You learn it and you can play with my band." And I said, "Hey, Dad, did you hear that?" He kicked in 50 and I kicked in 50 that I'd accumulated, mostly caddying for my father at the golf course, but we bought the first bass fiddle without knowing how to play it. It was a good investment. She taught me how to play, and I did in fact play with her and her sister and her mother, who had a country trio there in WPTF in Raleigh. And I ended up playing on WPTF with another group, Homer A. Briarhopper and the Dixie Dudes. Can you believe that one?
Homer who?
A. Briarhopper. His name really
A. Briarhopper.
That was the trade name. His name was D-R-Y-E, but every morning at 6 o'clock I'd go down and we'd have this 15-minute show. And then the radio station was about a half mile from my high school, Hugh Morrison High School, and I would go up there at lunch and play with this group. And we even went to Nashville while I was still in high school and cut a record. I think it sold 40 copies, but it was 78 RPM, of course. And as I recall, I had one chorus on the bass fiddle and Briarhopper Boogie. Boom, 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 boom. But got to start somewhere.
Is that in your album?
No, the Briarhopper Boogie is not. I don't even have a copy of that. That would really be a collector's item.
Did you walk back and forth from the studio to your high school?
Yeah, and thinking this over last night, I realized I never owned a car until I was 25 years old. Although I had a driver's license by the time I was 16, I never had my own car until I was 25.
So you took, you walked or you took public transportation?
My bass fiddle would be left at the station. My dad would help me back and forth.
And he was doing well enough then selling insurance?
He was doing so well selling insurance that he spent about as much time at the golf course as he did selling. Well, he was actually selling at the golf course. I think that's where a lot of businesses concentrated these days. He wanted me to be an insurance salesman, and I'm sure he was disappointed when I didn't do so. But I'm the worst salesman in the world. And even if he gave me the business, I would have probably messed it up. I'm too honest to be a good salesman.
But you caddied for him.
I caddied for him.
Got you outside.
Got me outside, and it was more fun for me when he knocked one in the woods than when it was out in the middle of the fairway. The botanist was out in the woods again.
Right. Do you remember any special friends from your high school days in Raleigh?
Yeah, the Bingham boys. They used to go to Crabtree Creek with me, and then Carl Smith, we called him Silas Marna because he was sitting around the coals. He was colder natured than some of these camping trips. In the wintertime, you get off cold. But those were my camping buddies, and they were the closest friends. Recently, Ben Templeton called me back to a reunion and said, well, sit at the head table. And why at the head table? You were vice president. I'd forgotten that I was vice president. That shows in these days of the election how important the vice president is.